Max was born into a small, tight-knit community, where people knew each other by name and looked out for one another. His family didn't have much, but they had something more valuable, a deep love for one another. Max's parents had always been supportive, especially when it came to his interests. From a very young age, Max showed an unusual connection with music. It wasn't just something he liked, it was something he felt. Max was born blind. The world he navigated was different from the one everyone around him experienced. He couldn't see the bright colors of the sky, the shapes of buildings, or the faces of his family. But in his world, sound was everything. He could hear things in a way that other people couldn't. The rustling of leaves in the wind, the hum of a distant conversation, the delicate flutter of a bird's wings, all of these sounds told him stories, painted pictures in his mind. And it was music that truly made him feel alive. Even before he could walk, Max would be found tapping on whatever he could reach, spoons, pots, anything that made noise. As he grew older, his parents noticed that there was a deep natural rhythm to everything he did. He didn't just tap randomly. He made patterns beat after beat like he was creating a song from scratch. Max's mother always dreamed of him becoming a musician, but she was realistic about their situation. They were a working-class family with very little extra money, and while they could support Max with the basics, they knew they could never afford the kind of lessons that could turn his natural talent into something extraordinary. Still, she couldn't help but imagine what it might be like to see her son play on a grand stage one day. One afternoon, as Max was sitting in their modest living room, his fingers dancing across the surface of the old piano his parents had bought years ago, Max's mother had an idea. She had heard rumors about a local piano teacher, a woman named Evelyn who was known for working with unconventional students. There were whispers that she had a special gift for teaching kids who didn't fit the typical mold. Most importantly, she was said to have a heart for those who couldn't afford high tuition fees, and she often gave her lessons for free. Max's mother had heard of this teacher before, but she'd never dared to reach out. She wasn't sure if Max's unusual situation, his blindness, would be seen as an obstacle or an opportunity, but something inside her told her to take a chance. So one day, she mustered up the courage to call Evelyn. To her surprise, Evelyn answered the phone herself. The woman's voice was warm, but there was an edge to it, like she was used to taking matters into her own hands and didn't have time for small talk. She listened carefully to Max's mother as she explained her son's situation, and then, without hesitation, Evelyn said, "I'm interested. I'll take him on as a student." Max's mother was floored. She had not expected such a quick, direct answer, but what came next surprised her even more. Evelyn told her to bring Max to the next available lesson, and that the lessons would be free. There was no catch, just a genuine willingness to help. Max's mother hung up the phone with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Could this be real? Was her son really about to get the kind of training that could take him to the next level? She didn't know much about Evelyn, but she knew one thing. This could be the opportunity they'd been waiting for. When the day came to meet Evelyn, Max's mother was filled with nerves. She had never expected to be in a position like this. She wasn't sure how the teacher would respond to Max's unique way of engaging with music, but she knew she had to try. She held Max's hand as they walked into Evelyn's house, which was located in a quiet part of town. The door was wide open when they arrived, and a tall woman with graying hair and glasses stood waiting in the doorway. Her presence was strong yet inviting. Evelyn didn't waste time with pleasantries. She quickly turned to Max and asked him to sit at the piano. "Show me what you can do," she said, her voice matter-of-fact yet not unkind. Max, with his fingers trembling slightly in anticipation, sat down on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. It wasn't the kind of performance you'd expect from a young child learning the basics. Max didn't play simple songs, he played with emotion. His fingers moved fluidly across the keys, picking up on every tone, every vibration. He couldn't see the keys, but he seemed to feel them in a way that was mesmerizing. There was a quiet power in his playing, something raw and unpolished, yet undeniably beautiful. Evelyn stood by, watching him intently. She didn't interrupt him. She didn't tell him what he should do. Instead, she simply listened. For several minutes, the room was filled with the sound of Max's music, flowing through the house like a river finding its way through an open field. When Max finished, he looked up, unsure of what to expect. He didn't see the usual expression of surprise or admiration that other people gave when they heard him play. Instead, Evelyn's face was calm, as though she had seen something like this before. She didn't clap or praise him immediately, but she nodded her head thoughtfully. "You have something special," she said. "I think we can work with that." Max's mother, who had been holding her breath the whole time, let out a sigh of relief. She had been so worried that Evelyn would find Max's style too unconventional, too unpredictable, but Evelyn seemed to see it differently. It wasn't the usual way of playing the piano, but it was still music, still something to be shaped and nurtured. Evelyn looked at Max's mother and said, "I'll take him on as my student, starting next week." There were no promises of fame, no guarantees that Max would become a world-renowned pianist, but there was something about Evelyn's tone that made them both feel hopeful, like they had just stepped into a world of possibility. As Max and his mother left the house that day, Max felt a sense of excitement he hadn't felt before. This was it. This was the beginning of something big. He didn't know where it would lead, but he knew that it was the first real step towards his dream of playing music that would touch the hearts of others. But what Max and his family didn't know was that there was someone else who had been watching from the shadows, someone who had been quietly following every step of Max's journey, without saying a word. Max was both excited and nervous as the days passed after his first meeting with Evelyn. The promise of free lessons was like a dream come true, but the reality of what that meant started to sink in. The next week he was back at Evelyn's house, sitting at the piano again, fingers trembling slightly, ready to see what would happen next. Evelyn wasted no time. She didn't make small talk or try to ease Max into things with a gentle introduction. She was direct but not unkind. She knew that Max had something special. There was no doubt about that. But she also knew that raw talent, like Max's, needed structure and guidance to flourish. She told him right away, "We're going to start from the basics. I know you have a good ear, but we need to build your technique, your ability to understand the theory behind the music. It's not just about playing the notes. It's about understanding the whole picture." Max nodded quietly, though he didn't quite understand what she meant. To him, music had always been about feeling it, not thinking about it. He had learned to play by ear, listening to songs and then reproducing them on the piano. But Evelyn was different. She didn't just want him to play the notes. She wanted him to feel the music in a new way. In the beginning, the lessons were slow and frustrating. Evelyn would give him exercises that felt mechanical, boring even. She would ask him to play scales, simple patterns of notes that in his mind seemed far less exciting than the intricate melodies he loved. Sometimes he would get frustrated and stop in the middle of an exercise, but Evelyn was patient. She would remind him, "We have to build a foundation first. Once you have that, you can play anything." Max didn't always see it that way, but he trusted her. He wanted to become better, to learn how to play the music that filled his heart. So, he stuck with it, even when it didn't feel as fun or natural as the music he created on his own. Evelyn's lessons were not just about the piano, though. She was a strict teacher, but she had a way of pushing Max that helped him grow. She would challenge him, not just in terms of technique, but also his mindset. Whenever he struggled with an exercise or couldn't get a piece just right, Evelyn would encourage him not to give up. "Perseverance is just as important as talent," she would say. "If you keep going, you'll surprise yourself with what you can do." And that's exactly what happened. Over time, Max began to see the results of his hard work. The boring scale started to feel less like a chore. They began to form the foundation of the beautiful melodies he loved to play. As he learned more about how music worked, he started to understand the connection between the notes, the rhythm, and the emotions they could evoke. Max was slowly becoming a better pianist, but he still wasn't sure how far he could go. He had dreams, of course, dreams of playing in front of a crowd, but they felt far away, almost impossible. But Evelyn's belief in him began to make him think that maybe, just maybe, his dreams weren't so far-fetched after all. Meanwhile, there was another figure watching from the sidelines. Each week, as Max sat in Evelyn's living room practicing diligently on the piano, there was someone else who would appear and quietly sit at the back of the room. A tall man, dressed in a suit, who always seemed to be lost in thought, observing without ever speaking. Max's family had noticed him a few times, but they didn't know who he was or why he was there. He was always silent, always a shadow in the background. At first they thought he might be just another student, or maybe even a friend of Evelyn's. But the man never introduced himself. and he never joined the conversation. Evelyn, however, seemed to pay him no mind. She didn't acknowledge his presence, and she certainly didn't make a big deal out of it. Max's mother, curious but not wanting to be intrusive, mentioned the man to Evelyn one day. But Evelyn just shrugged it off. "Oh, that's just someone interested in watching," she said casually. "He's not really part of the lessons." Still, the man kept coming back week after week, sitting silently in the back of the room as Max and Evelyn worked through one lesson after another. Max had no idea who he was or why he never spoke, but he had learned not to let distractions affect him. He focused on his playing, not on the mysterious observer in the corner. Over time, Max's playing grew more polished, more refined. Evelyn started giving him more challenging pieces, classical composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin. These composers were known for their complex, beautiful music, and the challenge they posed was exactly what Max needed. His skills improved rapidly, and with each new piece his confidence grew. He no longer relied solely on his ear. He was starting to understand the music in a way he never had before. But as the weeks turned into months, Evelyn began to notice something strange about the man who always watched. He seemed particularly interested in Max's progress, and though he never spoke to anyone, he always had an expression of quiet approval as he listened to Max play. One day, Evelyn finally decided to ask him who he was. "I'm just someone who appreciates talent," the man answered simply, not revealing much. "I'm not here to interfere, just to observe." Evelyn didn't press him further. She had her own way of running things, and whether the man was there to help or just watch didn't matter to her. What mattered was that Max was progressing, that his talent was shining through more clearly than ever. However, what neither Max nor Evelyn knew at that time was that the man who sat in silence watching every lesson had a plan. He was someone who had a particular interest in Max's potential, and not just as a piano player. He had been watching quietly for a reason. Max continued to work hard, unaware of the eyes on him, not knowing how his future was being shaped by someone who had never spoken a word to him. The lessons with Evelyn were starting to feel like a steady rhythm, challenging but comforting. Max was beginning to feel like he was moving closer to his goal of becoming a great musician, even if he didn't fully understand how or when it would happen. And just as Evelyn had promised, the more Max worked on his skills, the more the music started to come alive in ways he hadn't imagined before. It was no longer just about playing the right notes. It was about telling a story with each key, each melody, each pause. There was no longer a question in his mind about his ability. He had grown into something greater than he had ever been before. He was more than just a blind boy who could play the piano by ear. He was a musician, someone who could take the language of music and turn it into something beautiful. But the biggest question remained. Would he ever get the chance to share his music with the world? Max was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, a real sense of purpose. His lessons with Evelyn had become the highlight of his week. Each new piece of music, each new challenge, felt like a small victory. He could feel his talent growing, his connection to the piano strengthening. But what surprised him the most was how the music was starting to feel less like a series of notes on a page and more like an expression of himself. He wasn't just playing a song anymore, he was feeling it in a way he had never known before. Yet as Max grew more confident, the mysterious man continued to sit quietly in the back of the room. Week after week, he watched, never saying a word. There was something about him that made Max uneasy, but he tried not to let it distract him. After all, he had enough to focus on with his lessons and his dream of becoming a great pianist. But as much as he tried to ignore it, there was an odd sense of curiosity about the man who came to every lesson. The man never interacted with anyone. He didn't even make a sound other than the occasional shuffle in his seat. Sometimes Max would catch a glimpse of his face, but the man's expression was always hard to read. It wasn't cold or unfriendly, just quiet. Max didn't know why he was always there, but he couldn't help but wonder if he was somehow connected to the piano world Max hoped to break into. One afternoon during a particularly long lesson, Evelyn paused to take a sip of water. Max was practicing a piece by Beethoven, and it was getting difficult. The notes were becoming more complex, and the tempo was faster than anything he had played before. He was starting to feel overwhelmed. Evelyn noticed his frustration, and instead of telling him to try harder, she simply said, "Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about feeling the music." Max tried to focus, but the man sitting in the corner caught his attention again. His eyes were fixed on him. Max felt like he was being watched not just by the man, but by the weight of an unseen expectation. It made him nervous. Why was he here? Why hadn't he ever said anything? Max wanted to ask, but it seemed strange. The man hadn't spoken a word to him in all these months. Still, that question gnawed at him. After the lesson, Evelyn told Max to take the rest of the day off. He'd been working hard, and she could see he needed a break. Max nodded, grateful for the chance to relax, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave him. When he was about to leave, he heard Evelyn's voice calling to him. "Max, before you go, I need to show you something," she said, her tone serious, but not unkind. Max was curious, but at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. Evelyn led him into the back of her studio, a small room filled with old music sheets, books, and piano-related memorabilia. In the corner of the room, behind a dusty shelf, there was an old chest. Evelyn pulled it open, revealing a stack of letters. "These letters are from a long time ago," Evelyn explained. "They were written by a man who cared deeply about music. He believed in helping young musicians reach their potential, but he never wanted recognition for it. These letters are a part of his legacy." Max looked at the letters, unsure of what they meant. Evelyn continued, "This man was a wealthy CEO, someone who had made a name for himself in the business world, but he was also a lover of music. A lot of people didn't know this about him. He wanted to remain anonymous, so he made sure to never reveal his identity. He used his wealth to support talented musicians like you, but he didn't want any thanks for it. He just wanted to help." Max's mind was spinning. A CEO? Why hadn't Evelyn told him about this before? But she wasn't finished. She picked up one of the letters and handed it to Max. "You're his legacy," she said simply. "This man, he's been watching you. He believes in your talent." Max felt a chill run down his spine. The man in the corner of the room, the one who had been watching him, was the CEO mentioned in the letters. Evelyn hadn't told him the full story until now. The person who had quietly observed his lessons was the same person who had been funding his lessons all along. Max didn't know what to say. He was stunned. He felt a mix of confusion and awe. Who was this man? Why had he been so silent all this time? Evelyn explained that the CEO had insisted on remaining anonymous because he didn't want to make Max feel pressured or indebted. He wanted Max to succeed on his own, without any strings attached. All this time, the money for Max's lessons, the travel expenses for his performances, even the piano he practiced on, had been provided by this mysterious benefactor. Max's head was spinning. He couldn't believe it. Everything he had worked, for everything he had dreamed of, had been silently supported by someone he didn't even know. It felt like something out of a storybook. But Evelyn, with her calm demeanor, simply smiled and told him, "This man saw your potential long before you did. He's been quietly following your progress, and he believes you have what it takes to be great. Now it's time for you to believe in yourself." Max stood there, holding the letter, trying to process everything. His dreams were starting to feel more possible than ever. He hadn't just been supported by a teacher, but by someone who believed in him enough to stay in the shadows and help without asking for anything in return. Max felt a sense of gratitude and awe that was hard to put into words. But there was still so much he didn't understand. Who was this man really? Why had he chosen him? Max was dying to know. But Evelyn simply told him that in time, the truth would be revealed. As Max left the studio that day, he was more determined than ever to live up to the trust this anonymous benefactor had placed in him. He had always dreamed of being a pianist, but now it felt like the world was opening up to him in ways he had never imagined. But there was still a part of him that felt unsettled. Why had this man chosen him? Why had he waited so long to reveal himself? And most importantly, what would happen when he finally stepped out of the shadows? Max couldn't shake these questions from his mind, but one thing was certain. He was ready to step up. With Evelyn's guidance and the mysterious CEO's support, Max's journey was just beginning. Max's mind was racing with questions as he left Evelyn's studio that day. The letter he had held in his hand, the one from the anonymous benefactor, was still tucked safely in his bag. But the mystery surrounding it was beginning to feel more like a weight than a gift. He couldn't stop thinking about the man who had been watching him all these months. Why had he stayed silent for so long? Why hadn't he stepped forward sooner? And most of all, what was this man hoping to see in him? Max walked home that day in a fog, his usual sense of excitement over his lessons replaced by an unease that seemed to settle deep within him. Music had always been his escape, the one place where he could shut out the world and just feel. But now everything was tied to this unseen figure, the man who had been silently pulling the strings behind the scenes. That night, as Max sat at the dinner table with his family, he tried his best to act normal, but it wasn't easy. His mother could see something was off. She had noticed the change in his behavior since the day he'd come home from Evelyn's studio, but she didn't want to push him too hard. She could tell that he was wrestling with something, but she didn't know what it was. So she waited. Max's father, who was always busy with work, barely noticed the tension, but Max's mother knew her son well enough to see that something had shifted. She gently placed a hand on his and asked, "What's going on, Max? You've been so quiet lately." Max hesitated, not sure how to explain everything that had happened. He had never been one to keep secrets, but this felt different. It was all too much to process, too overwhelming. Finally, after a long pause, he told her everything. He explained how Evelyn had shown him the letters, how the mysterious man in the back of the room was the one who had been quietly supporting him all along. At first, his mother was stunned. She didn't know what to say. She was grateful, of course, but also confused. Who was this man? What did he want in return for his support? Was Max ready for whatever came next? Max's mother listened carefully as he spoke, nodding every so often, but she didn't have the answers he was looking for. She could see how much it was weighing on him, but she also knew that Max had always been determined. He had worked hard to get this far, and he had always found a way through difficult situations. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she told him. "Just keep doing what you've been doing." Take it one step at a time. Max wasn't so sure. How could he focus on his music when he didn't even know who was behind it all? But his mother's words helped him see things a little differently. Maybe she was right. Maybe he just needed to trust that things would work out. The next few days passed by in a blur. Max continued his lessons with Evelyn, but the shadow of the mysterious benefactor hung over him. He couldn't stop wondering what was coming next. Would this man ever speak to him? Would he finally step out of the shadows and reveal himself? Or would Max continue to play this game of silent observation? And then one morning, something unexpected happened. Max arrived at Evelyn's studio ready for his usual lesson. But there was something different about the atmosphere that day. Evelyn was unusually quiet, and there was a nervous energy in the air that Max couldn't quite place. It wasn't until they were halfway through the lesson that Evelyn finally spoke. "Max," she said, her voice more serious than usual, "I think it's time for you to meet him." Max's heart skipped a beat. Meet him, the mysterious man? Was this really happening? He hadn't expected anything to change so suddenly. He had always imagined that one day he might get to meet this benefactor, but he didn't think it would happen so soon. Evelyn stood up and walked over to the door. "He's waiting for you in the other room." Max felt a lump form in his throat. His palms were sweaty and his mind was racing. He had no idea what to expect. What would this man be like? Would he be kind? Would he be cold? What did he want from Max? "Don't be nervous," Evelyn said with a small smile, sensing his anxiety. "He's not what you think. He just wants to talk. And he believes in you. That's why he's been here all this time." Max wasn't sure what to make of that. All he knew was that he was about to step into a new chapter of his life. And as much as he wanted to know more about this mysterious figure, a part of him was terrified. Was he really ready for whatever was about to happen? Taking a deep breath, Max walked toward the door that led into the next room. His heart was pounding in his chest. When he stepped inside, the room was quiet, almost too quiet. There, standing in front of him, was the man who had been watching him all along. He wasn't what Max expected. The man was older, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a calm, composed demeanor. He was dressed in a simple suit, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, looking at Max with an expression that was both kind and serious. Max stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say. The man, sensing his hesitation, smiled gently. "You must have a lot of questions," the man said, his voice surprisingly warm. "I'm not here to overwhelm you. I just want you to know that I've been following your progress for a long time. I've watched you grow from someone with raw talent into a true musician. You've got something special, Max." Max didn't know how to respond. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to ask, but he couldn't seem to find the words. The man continued, "You've probably wondered who I am, why I've been so quiet all this time. The truth is, I didn't want to be a distraction. I didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated. I wanted you to follow your passion and discover your own path." Max listened, still unsure of what to make of this conversation. The man went on to explain how he had made a fortune in the business world, but that music had always been his true love. He had made a promise to himself that he would use his wealth to support young musicians, to give them the opportunities that they might not have otherwise had. "I believe in you, Max," the man said quietly. "I've seen what you can do, and I know that you can go far. You have a gift, and I want to help you take it to the next level. But this isn't about money. It's about you, your talent, and your future." Max's heart was racing. He didn't know what to say. This man, who had been a silent presence in his life for so long, was offering him something more than just lessons or funding. He was offering his belief in Max, his faith in his potential. "I don't know what to say," Max finally managed to whisper, his voice shaking. "You don't have to say anything," the man replied, smiling. "You just need to keep doing what you're doing. You're on the right path. Trust yourself and the rest will follow." For the first time in a long while, Max felt a deep sense of clarity. This was real. This wasn't just a dream. He had the support, the guidance, and the belief of someone who truly saw him. And now, it was up to him to make the most of it. The man looked at Max for a moment, then said, "I'll be here when you're ready. But remember, this journey is yours. I'm just here to help you along the way." Max stood there, still processing everything, but a small smile began to form on his face. The mystery wasn't as scary as it once seemed. It was just the beginning of something bigger, and for the first time, Max felt ready. Max walked out of the studio that day with his mind in a whirl. He had finally met the man who had been silently supporting him all along. The mystery was gone, but in its place a whole new set of questions had opened up. He now knew who the man was, why he had been watching, and what he wanted for Max. But that didn't make things any easier. If anything, it only made the weight of his dreams feel heavier. For years, Max had worked toward his goal of becoming a great pianist, but it had always been a journey that he took alone. Sure, there were moments of help from his mother, Evelyn, and a few friends, but the majority of it had been Max playing on his own, struggling through the challenges of blindness and the complex world of music. But now it felt different. Now he had someone who truly believed in him, someone who was willing to put everything on the line to help him reach his potential. As he walked back home, Max couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he'd had with the man. The man's words had been simple but powerful. Trust yourself, and the rest will follow. It was advice that Max had heard before, but something about the way the man said it, with so much conviction and warmth, made it feel different. This man had already given Max so much: his time, his support, his resources, and all he asked in return was for Max to believe in himself. But that was easier said than done. Max had always struggled with self-doubt. He was talented, yes, but there was always that voice in the back of his mind telling him that he wasn't enough, that he wasn't good enough to make it, that he would always be just a boy who played piano by ear. The idea of stepping into the spotlight, of actually becoming the pianist he had dreamed of being, terrified him. What if he failed? What if people didn't like his music? What if he let everyone down? But as he thought about it, Max realized that he couldn't afford to let fear control him any longer. He had worked too hard, had come too far to stop now. He couldn't let the doubts and the unknown stand in his way. He had a gift, and it was time to let it shine. The next day, Max arrived at Evelyn's studio with a renewed sense of purpose. He walked into the room, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks, and sat down at the piano. Evelyn was already there, waiting for him, her usual calm smile on her face. "Ready for today's lesson?" she asked, her voice steady but encouraging. Max nodded. "I think so." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, sensing that something had changed in him. "What's different?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Max paused for a moment, then said, I'm ready to stop holding myself back. I've been given an opportunity and I'm not going to waste it. Evelyn's smile widened. That's the spirit. Let's get started then. For the first time in a long time, Max felt completely present. His fingers moved over the keys with confidence and the music flowed from him effortlessly. He wasn't thinking about the past or about all the things that could go wrong. He was simply playing, allowing the music to take him where it wanted to go. The room seemed to disappear as he got lost in the sound. Every note, every chord felt like it had meaning. As he finished the piece, Evelyn clapped her hands together. That's the Max I know, she said, her voice filled with pride. You're starting to get it. The music comes from you, from inside. It's not just about playing the notes, it's about expressing what's in your heart. Max smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. He had always known this deep down, but hearing it from Evelyn made him realize how much he had grown. For the first time, he wasn't playing for approval. He was playing because it was who he was. But just as the lesson was coming to a close, Evelyn paused. There's something else I need to tell you, Max. Max looked up, his curiosity piqued. The man who's been supporting you, he wants to take the next step, she said. He believes you're ready. He's been in contact with a music academy that specializes in training pianists with unique backgrounds, just like yours. Max's heart skipped a beat. A music academy? He repeated, the idea almost too big to comprehend. Evelyn nodded. Yes, he wants to help you take your music to the next level. He's offered to sponsor your education there. Max was speechless. A music academy? This was more than he had ever imagined. It was the kind of opportunity he had always dreamed of, but never thought would come true. He felt a rush of emotions, excitement, gratitude, and yes, even fear. Are you ready for this? Evelyn asked, her voice soft but firm. This is a big step, Max. You've worked so hard to get here. Do you believe in yourself enough to take it? Max didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, his voice steady. I do, Evelyn smiled. Then let's do it. Over the next few weeks, everything started to move quickly. Max was accepted into the academy, and with the help of the anonymous benefactor, all the arrangements were made. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. Max moved into the academy's dormitories and began his training under some of the best instructors in the world. He was surrounded by other talented musicians, each with their own story and their own struggles. Some of them had come from wealthy families, others from difficult backgrounds, but all of them had one thing in common: passion for music. At first, Max was intimidated. He was still learning so much, and he couldn't help but compare himself to the other students. Some of them were so accomplished, their skills honed to perfection. But as the weeks passed, Max realized something important. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about growing, learning, and staying true to who you were as an artist. As he practiced every day, Max's music began to change. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for the world. His pieces began to tell stories of struggle, hope, and triumph. Music became his way of communicating with people in a way that words never could, and the more he played, the more he realized that he was no longer just the boy who played the piano by ear. He was a true musician, someone who could take the world on a journey with his music. Months later, Max was invited to perform at a concert in front of an audience for the first time in his life. It was a nerve-wracking experience, but as he sat at the piano and felt the keys beneath his fingers, something inside him clicked. This was his moment. He had worked for this. He had earned it. When he finished his performance, the audience erupted into applause. The sound was deafening, but in the best way possible. Max stood up from the piano, his heart racing, and took a bow. He had done it. He had made it. As he walked off the stage, Evelyn was there waiting for him, a proud smile on her face. You did it, she said, her voice full of emotion. Max nodded, his eyes bright. We did it, he corrected her. I couldn't have done it without you. And him. Evelyn looked at him with understanding. You've always had the talent, Max. You just needed to believe in it. And for the first time in his life, Max truly did.